What?
Do you feel me?
All right.
Do you feel me? Do you feel me? Do you feel me?
Hey, what's good? Yo, so we're back, right? We're
Yep.
back. We're ready to do this one more time.
Sports
One
Like
more game.
MD's
Podcast.
episode
Podcast time.
32.
Podcast time. Podcast time. What's up? What's good? What's good in the hood?
Right now it's NFL draft week.
Yes, it is.
It's a big day for a lot of individuals, big day for a lot of organizations, big day for a lot of people, sports fans.
No, it is, man.
We actually get some sort of live event.
Absolutely. No, it's a game-changing event, right? I mean, the player that's selected in one of, if not several of the rounds of this particular draft could transform a franchise, right? Could turn the whole thing around, right? Just one pick.
A lot of pressure. A lot of pressures on these GMs, these head coaches, these owners to put together a winning team, a winning culture. So
absolutely, man. Yeah, I mean, imagine, could there possibly be a Tom Brady, in this draft, right? A guy in the 6th round.
Well, let me answer that. No, there's no Tom Brady in this draft.
Can you imagine though, right? God, that guy, he fell all the way down to the 6th round and ended up becoming the greatest probably player in the history of the NFL.
Well, that's the thing. I don't think Tom Brady becomes Tom Brady if he wasn't drafted in the 6th round.
Right?
That
it's
provided a lot of motivation for him.
Yeah.
That chip on his shoulder.
Absolutely. And, and I think, certain personality types are driven by that, right? I mean, we mentioned the Michael Jordan documentary earlier. And yeah, I mean, he talks about this all the time. I mean, in his sophomore year of high school, he didn't make the varsity team, and how that fueled him to just work harder, and get better and better. And, eventually, he became obviously who he became. So
exactly. Everybody needs that source of motivation. Where does it come from? Where does it start? Oftentimes we'll get into it, but we want it to eventually be able to come from within because that's the most reliable and sustainable. But today we're essentially going to have 3 segments to this podcast. We're at first going to talk about team dynamics. It's an extension of episode 18 where we introduced the DISC assessment.
Yeah,
So oh yeah.
Right.
So this is going to be from like a GM's head coach perspective. How do you draft a solid team going into the NFL draft? Next segment, we're going to talk about the pressures of being that number 1 overall pick. And we'll talk a little bit about not only the NFL draft, but the NBA draft. Maybe we're going to break down maybe the last 20 or so first overall picks in both drafts. And I think there's a lot more busts than you may realize. And then what are the attributes that go into a number 1 overall pick? And then we're going to talk about the potential studs in this year's draft that Armin and I both, I think, have our eyes on. And then we'll wrap it up by talking about what now, like what next for these individuals who have accomplished this goal and are shown on live TV, ideally walking up to the stage and shaking hands with Roger Goodell. And that's not happening for this draft due to coronavirus, but they're going to be doing it virtual. Sure. So that you accomplish.
That's right, man. Corona style.
Yeah.
I mean, look, we got like the whole setup for you guys with, Kobe on my left.
I got you. Yeah. I see that.
The other MJ on my right.
Controversial MJ.
God, the NFL draft it's such an exciting time. It's an exciting time for everybody. One of the cool things about professional sports, and I think the NFL in particular does a really good job of this, is trying to create parity, right, within the league, so that even smaller markets, right, like Indianapolis, right, smaller markets like Tampa Bay, can still have a player that's a transcendent player.
Oh yeah,
right.
Colts draft and Peyton Manning.
Right, come into their organization and just like change the whole culture. I mean, that's the thing about especially like a first round draft pick, in terms of what it means for an organization, particularly like a quarterback or a player that's going to ultimately assume a high level leadership position, an important skill position on the team. Like this this is a person that you're anticipating is not just going to be, a strong contributor to your offense or defensive strategy. I mean, you're looking for a person that's really going to change the entire culture of the locker room, right? The entire culture of the organization. Hopefully, someone the fan base can get excited about,
Yeah.
right?
Especially for
Someone
those.
that can sell tickets,
Yeah, definitely
get merchandise
for those
sales revenue going and all, the whole nine.
Yeah, definitely for those teams at the top of the draft, like in the teams in the NBA lottery, for sure are looking for that. And
Yeah,
for this draft, the Cincinnati Bengals are definitely looking for something like that. The Miami Dolphins, Oakland
absolutely,
Raiders,
man. Yeah.
Chargers, they're all looking for these marquee guys to get some hype built up around their team, but also to win, get back to winning.
Yeah, get back to winning. And the cool thing about a draft, and this is something that, as a more astute, more mature fan, I started to realize is that, it's one thing to trade for a guy, and get like a new guy into your system, from another team that, is a seasoned vet, right? They're proven, they have some sort of skill set that, your team really needs. Like it's great when that happens, and oftentimes when that happens, that person is really a piece, right? A piece of the puzzle to that system that you're trying to build. It's not very often that you're going out on the free agency market looking for that, that number one game changing, culture changing talent, right? Because usually you want that guy to be someone that the fan base gets to see from the beginning, right? That gets to buy in,
Homegrown.
right, into your organization, your culture, and your system from the beginning, right? And your coaches, your coaching staff can ultimately start nurturing that player from the beginning. That's the ideal. I think
Yeah.
most organizations would agree with that.
Absolutely, because then I think that individual, there's a sense of gratitude towards that team.
Absolutely. Yeah.
They and a lot of times that can lead to them playing harder. Like you're not going to regret this draft pick,
Yeah.
and they're going to play even harder. And there is something to be said about that. I think we're seeing a little bit of the changing of the guard. I think the Rams recently, I mean, they had some good draft picks, Todd Gurley, Jared Goff, but they went after in free agency, and it almost paid off in a Super Bowl recently. I know they brought in a lot of big name free agents before their Super Bowl run, and even Jalen Ramsey last year. So now they're they don't have a lot of draft picks coming up. So we'll see how that turns out. But yeah, I think building a team through the draft is ultimately the way to go, and a lot how most teams want to do it. And
well, and hey, if you think about it, if you really look back, I mean, there's been several teams, especially in the NFL, that have been Super Bowl winners, but you haven't had necessarily many dynasties, right? The dynasties are really among a select few in the NFL, and this goes way back, like the '60s. I mean, there's these few organizations, and those dynasties, oftentimes, if you look at them, their key players were through the draft.
mm-hmm.
Were acquired through the draft. Were home, as you said, homegrown guys that by years 4, 5, 6, they enter that prime, and it's like 2, 3, 4 guys, right,
Yep.
that are all kind of entering their prime around the same time. That's when you get like the ultimate chemistry, especially when you have the same coaching staff, same leadership, management, top to bottom.
Yep.
Right, that type of infrastructure. That's when you have something.
Yeah, it's kind of like, well, I mean, the nucleus of the Chicago Bulls, I know we're switching sports, were 2 guys they got in the draft, Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen. And I don't know if we'll see much more of that in the NBA, but the NFL, it's still, I think you still have that ability to really build your team through the draft and create, there's still a possibility to create dynasties through the draft. I think in the NBA now it's more about just joining up with your super teams and with your buddies. But
Yeah.
the draft is so important.
Yeah, no, that's I mean, I know we're going to talk more about it next week, but that's kind of one of the things that's cool about this MJ documentary series is it kind of shows you what the NFL, excuse me, it kind of shows you what the NBA used to be, right? Where it was all about these teams, all of which had really started from the beginning together, came up together, and like back in the 80s when you had the Lakers and the Celtics, right? And then the 76ers were kind of in that mix early on. The Pistons were kind of in that mix like later on. Yeah. But these were teams that had really just they were great coaches, great systems, great players, all top to bottom, the entire starting five. And it was just like a clash of the Titans year in and year out. It was great. I mean, man, the 80s and 90s was an era of basketball that was just so amazing.
Yeah. And those, it took time. Those teams had to fight through adversity. Like you mentioned, like the Bulls, they had to get their licks. They got beat by the Celtics, and they had to go through the Pistons, who were kind of running it for a couple of years. So, what season did Michael Jordan end up winning his first championship? Wasn't until his sixth season?
91, 92, somewhere in there. So we're talking about, I think maybe his seventh year in the league.
Yeah. So it takes time to build a team and to build a dynasty. I think obviously the Spurs, we saw that recently, and that's come to an end. But they had a great run, and then that core nucleus of Golden State was built through the draft, and they had a good run. Obviously, they added KD at the end there to help get them over the hump the last couple times. But the core
on that to that point though, man, it kind of goes to show you how groundbreaking it was for LeBron James to do what he did. When he joined forces with Dwayne Wade, and then of course brought over Chris Bosh. Now you have, the construction of a super team, essentially a team meant for a dynasty, but that was, basically assembled by players. Almost exclusively by players.
Which that's a divisive thing. You could hate it or love it, but I mean, it worked out for them, and that's almost the new normal now here in the NBA. I still got that old school mentality, though. I kind of enjoy when you see a team kind of grow together throughout the years and overcome these hurdles. You kind of saw it with Golden State. They had to, I think they gave the Spurs the run for their money. I forget which year when they were together, and then finally that next year they played Memphis.
Oh yeah.
What was Memphis's nickname? Like Grit and Grind.
Yeah,
Grit and yeah. So
something like that. Yeah.
And I think they went down early. Yeah, they went down early in that series, but ended up just kind of kicking their asses.
Zach Randolph,
Marc Gasol, Tony Allen.
Oh yeah.
And Mike Conley.
Stout.
Yeah. So, and then they obviously won the championship that year, and then the next year they broke the Bulls' 72 win record.
That was definitely a season of major what ifs. Gosh, what if Kyrie Irving hadn't gone down, in game one of that final series, right? What if Kevin Love hadn't gotten hurt, in that Boston series, right? I really think the Cavs that year, I think that they could have been a very, very formidable opponent had they been at full strength. I really do. I still believe, actually, that had they had the big three in there, that based on the fact that LeBron won 2 games and took him to 6 by himself, they could have won that.
And I think that Draymond the next year didn't get suspended for a game, that the Warriors would have been back to back. But I think we could do this all day with what ifs. I do think that it's that testament, though, that the Cavs, that was the first year that group together. So if they would have been healthy, maybe, but I think they needed that year to test them, and they came back next year and obviously won. So it takes time. So where does it start? It starts at the draft. So this
Right.
first segment, let's talk about team dynamics. So I think the most appropriate thing for a GM, head coach, owner to do is all get on the same page. And I think the best way to do that is you set up a list of team values, like, or values within the organization. You have a vision of what culture you want to create. So this could kind of look like anything. It could be like winning above everything, discipline, hard work. Maybe you want to make sure you have a really upbeat locker room. Maybe that's a value for your team. You want players that love the game more than they love the paycheck, regardless
Yeah.
maybe how good they are. Um, there's all these different things. Do you want to build your team on toughness, or do you want to build your team on speed? Obviously, depending on what kind of scheme you're running, but you want to have a set of values. So you want to go into the draft knowing exactly what you're looking for in players. Just get on the same page with your whole staff and knowing, like, all right, what do we value in an individual?
Yeah, but I think we would be remiss if we didn't also recognize that that type of conversation, you're talking about the values you want in players. I think it really has a lot to do with understanding like your system, or the type of system, type of offense that you're trying to have, and how those individuals would ultimately fit into your system. For example, right? You think about having a system like an offensive system, like a ground and pound. Think about the Tennessee Titans, right? This past season, you're not going to necessarily be looking for a Phil Rivers, type of a quarterback, or
You're not going to want
a
like a
Tom
James.
Brady type of quarterback.
I mean,
Or
you may want a Tom Brady. I don't think you
no,
want
no,
someone
no.
like you don't want a
I'm not.
Jameis. You don't want a Jameis Winston type
You
quarterback.
don't want a gunslinger yet.
Yeah, you don't want a high risk, high reward.
You want a guy that's very steady, right? That
Mhm.
plays within himself, plays with the offense. It's not really trying to take a lot of risks.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have used Brady because honestly he would fit into any offense.
Yeah, he's the best game managing quarterback.
But I was not. He's the best any type of quarterback, to include game manager. The thing about Tom Brady, though, the reason why I didn't put him in this category is because really, let's be honest. I mean, you're with the Tennessee Titans team, your running back is going to be your feature guy, right? That's your feature back. That's your feature. That's the guy you want the ball, in his hands is your running back position. So it sort of wouldn't make sense to pay a guy like a Brady to have that type of alpha guy who wants to, be the guy
Wants the ball in his
on
hands.
a team like that,
Yeah.
because he's not going to get enough opportunities.
Yeah. Speaking to
yeah.
the Titans, you're not going to, if you're a downhill running team, punch you in the mouth, run it down your face. You don't want to get like smaller, faster linemen built more for like a wide open spread offense. You want to get maybe the bigger, stronger, heftier offensive linemen. So you got to know your team's identity. You got to know their culture, but not only on the field, but I'm talking in the locker room as well. So
Absolutely,
which is probably more difficult for these guys.
Yeah. Locker room chemistry is interesting. I mean, there's so much that goes into it, because the locker room is almost like, it's a very private space, it's like, boys club, and obviously you have to have a lot of trust in there, the things that are said and things that are done in that space have to stay in that space.
Mm-hmm.
And you definitely have to have players that are, able to communicate effectively, and where there's sort of, one voice. Obviously, many voices in the sense that, you want a team where everybody feels like they're a part of it, everybody feels like, they can speak up, but you want to have also one unifying voice and narrative in terms of, what the team's about.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And there's definitely different cultures within the NFL. I think I remember an offensive lineman, I think it was for the Philadelphia Eagles, Lane Johnson, who said he'd rather win one Super Bowl and have fun winning it with the Eagles versus win several and not have fun. Like, I think he was taking a shot at Bill Belichick and the Patriots, because Bill Belichick is known for a strict guy, focus on the fundamentals, and maybe not the most pleasant coach to be around. He's not a player's coach. He doesn't have the reputation, but it's effective and they win a lot. What's more important? enjoying the process or the winning that Super Bowl and hoisting the Lombardi Trophy. So I think as a GM, you have to know: do I have a players coach, or do I have more of that that Bill Belichick type, that dictator type,
Mm-hmm.
and definitely maybe drafting guys that
Yeah,
you think fit.
absolutely. I mean, that's big, because, a guy like Belichick, I mean, it's a wonder, for example, that a Aaron Hernandez type of guy even made it onto a team like the Patriots, because, they just don't really put up with a whole lot of extra stuff, right?
They've been known to
Um,
take a lot of these troubled, quote unquote, troubled guys, and
they
it's
do.
paid off. It's paid off at
I
times.
They do. It's interesting. You're right. Belichick does seem to have a way with certain types of guys in terms of, I think his more like, military style of just, hey, here's the rules. You stay within this framework. Here's your boundaries, and I think it works for some guys.
Yeah.
But I tell you what, there's a lot of other guys that I really don't think it would work for.
Yeah.
I mean, you see how long Antonio Brown lasted. Was it like
Yeah.
2 or 3 weeks?
And I think that the owner had to pull the leash on that. But Tony,
Yeah.
and I think looking back on that, Mike Tomlin was able to keep Antonio Brown in wraps for a long time before it finally wasn't worth it. And Mike
Now,
Tomlin,
see, he's a guy. He's a
the
very
players
different
coach,
guy. Yeah,
definitely
he's
a
a
players
players
coach.
coach. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
what does that mean to be a players coach? If we're going to relate this to the DISC assessment, which is
Mhm.
the four characteristics on how you fit into a team. It's dominant. Are you dominant? Are you an influencer? Are you conscientious, or are you steady? I think
Steady. Yeah.
I think a players coach is more of that kind of influencer, people oriented, also steady. Like you're a glue guy almost. You want to make sure the bonds amongst all your teammates and coaching staff are tight,
Yeah.
and you're not trying to necessarily ruffle people's feathers. You're trying to
Mhm.
be more of a calming influence, be on each person's side in order to kind of gain that trust and loyalty. And
Yeah.
that's how you get the best out of your team, is you build that relationship with them.
Influencer, absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, that's the one that just kind of like jumps off the page, because and if you listen to Mike Tomlin, he actually gives great like post game interviews
He's
and
definitely a fan of coach
great
speak.
speeches. Oh man, like he's very motivating, very very inspiring. But when you listen to him, he's in his own little way. He's kind of like a rah rah guy. I mean, he's like always speaking very highly of his players. He's using what seems to be more like positive psychology principles through his narratives, and he's always talking about like team first. He's very good about naming the players and identifying the players that he wants to highlight.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, I think he's a guy that knows how to tap into kind of the emotional side of the game and the experience that players have, and he connects there.
Yeah.
Almost like a guy that, like, I remember when he first came into the league, I wasn't really sure, like, because I don't think he was like
He's the youngest head coach at the time.
right. And I remember like saying to myself, yeah, like this guy, he seemed like a guy that literally had just stepped off of the
Oh,
field,
he's younger than some of the players.
and just like put on, like kind of the headgear and picked up a clipboard, kind of thing, and just went to work. And it just felt like he had that type of connectedness with the team, and always had. And he was successful from the beginning, if you remember.
And absolutely. And I definitely think that it helped the fact that he was closer in age to a lot of these guys and closer in experience than say like a Bill Belichick, who's much older. So, but what you mentioned his press conferences, he's not throwing his players under the bus. He's not calling them out in front of the media because he cares. He knows those bonds are what are going to or what. He knows that those bonds are the things that are ultimately going to make his players play harder for him. So there's a lot of we could probably go through all the coaches and put them in the category of players coach versus, what's the term of the other type of coach, like no nonsense coach. I know Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll's for sure a players coach.
For sure, players
He's all
coach.
about the influence.
Yeah.
He's a big time influencer.
Yeah, and to the point that we were making earlier, right? If a player's coach is going to mesh well with certain types of players, right?
Mhm.
In terms of in football, the quarterback position. But then, I think that you have to understand what you have in
Mhm.
your players.
Absolutely. And so it's, like you mentioned, it's all about understanding. So it's, if you're a GM who's above the coach, you want to make sure the relationship with the GM and the coach they're on the same page. So if you have a coach like Mike Tomlin or Pete Carroll, who is an influencer, the GM has to be aware of that to know that, all right, this person who is kind of on that is on the spectrum, is his
On the
personality.
spectrum.
Yeah, no,
No
is
pun intended,
yeah.
right?
If you have a coach who's more of an influencer, someone who
Yeah,
works off emotions, is more enthusiastic,
yeah, yeah.
really cares about the social relationships, then as a GM, you want to also you obviously have to want to be aware of that and know that, but maybe you don't want to have a GM you don't want to pair a coach who's an influencer with a GM who is an influencer, because at some point you need to also head in the right direction towards winning, and at a certain point you can't necessarily, I mean, you can, but is it beneficial for your team to ultimately win if you care more about the social relationships than winning itself? So
Yeah.
if you have a head coach who's more of a player's coach, you want to have a GM or an owner or someone else in upper management who is more focused on the end goals, who's more focused on winning, who may be more conscientious, who may be more focused on kind of the what is like the data, the analytics.
Analytics.
That's
Yeah,
becoming bigger
absolutely.
now. So
Yeah.
you have to
Hmm.
balance this out.
Yeah, you have to. And I think about when I think about the dominant coach, right? The type of coach that probably best captures that image for me is Greg Popovich of the San Antonio Spurs,
Yeah.
right? I mean, he's a guy that's in your face. I mean, I feel like I've even seen him grab guys, like physically, you know,
Yeah.
grab these, like 7-foot guys, and will kind of say, hey, look, to get their attention and say, hey, you can be better, you can do better, right?
Mhm. I think the great thing about Popovich, though, is I think he's almost just as much as an influencer as well, because like we mentioned in previous podcasts, he'll get his team together and they'll watch documentaries about Martin
Oh,
Luther
he's
King
absolutely an
Jr.
influencer.
and
Yeah,
he's all about
yeah,
creating a family environment. That's what
absolutely,
he
man.
cares about, those relationships, and through the strength of his relationships, he then exerts his dominance, because
He does,
if
and
I
that's why he's so successful, is the
Mhm.
balance, the balance of the two. And this is actually a really important theme that you brought up, right? Is that when you're putting this together, it's like a jigsaw puzzle, right? And what you ultimately want to have, in order to have all the pieces fit, is balance. You have to have balance, right? So it can't just be, all dominant, or all conscientious, or all influencer. That often doesn't work. It
Mhm.
really has to be, a balance of forces, both within that individual component, meaning the coach or the player,
I think you're
and then
right.
a balance of forces across the team,
Yeah.
and across the organization.
I think an ideal head coach, ideal
Yeah.
team manager, is someone who can embody any four of these characteristics at a certain time. They could be dominant when they need to be dominant. They could be an influencer and
Yeah.
care more about the relationships. They could be more conscientious and be open to looking at the analytics. And they also could be steady and really want to steady the course and maintain their focus. So that's what you want out of a head coach. And then when you're drafting players, because we're going to get back to the NFL draft, the quarterback is no one would argue that's the biggest position in all of sports, most important
Yeah.
position in all of sports.
Yeah. Definitely is the most sort of responsibility,
Yeah.
right?
And I think you definitely
Yeah,
want some dominance in your quarterback.
yeah, yeah, and I think let's be clear, right? I mean, we're using these broad-based terms, right? But these terms have sort of like these characteristics that are they're wide ranging, right? They're across the spectrum in terms of what goes into the dominant, personality profile versus the influencer personality profile versus the steady versus the conscientious. And one of the things about a dominant person that's really important, particularly for the quarterback position, is the willingness to accept, right, the burden of potentially being wrong, willing to hey, to put it all on his or her shoulders, right? To say, hey, I'm willing to take the last shot, right? I'm willing to throw that pass, through like three defenders, just that
I'm
like
gonna hit
right
that
in
15
the
and
what I
out.
mean? Yeah, I mean, I'm going to make that play, and it's going to be all on me. And at the end of the day, right, I'm going to stand there in front of those cameras, and I'm going to accept, the blame, make or miss.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, by nature, the quarterback has the ball in his hands every single snap. So you want someone who isn't afraid to have the ball in their hands and isn't afraid of ha- going for it and making that throw or scrambling and going for it that way. A la, a la John Elway. And that's the Super Bowl against the Falcons when he did the little twirl across the
That's
pylon.
an incredible play,
Yeah.
man. Those are the plays, though. Those are the ones like he had to make a decision. There was a certain point, right, in where in his mind, he had to come up with this, this. He had to determine, right. I can either throw or I can run, right. And I think you can make an argument that had he not made the decision that he did make, that it could have been a completely different
Yeah.
outcome for that team.
And if he wasn't a dominant guy, who knows if he would have made that.
And I have a feeling, dude. I have a feeling that you're the guy that drafted him, that GM, that whomever, and you see that play. 20 years down the road, you look at that play and you say to yourself, "That's why I drafted that guy."
Mm-hmm.
Like
Absolutely.
it plays like that.
Absolutely. And this isn't to say that we expect, like we were mentioned earlier, the Tennessee Titans, Ryan Tannehill, he needs to be dominant in his own way, but he can't bite off more than he can chew. At the end of the day, you're not going to call a audible at the line of scrimmage when it's 3rd and 1 from the 1 yard line. You're going to give it to Derrick Henry. You got to you got to know your role, but being part of being dominant is being able to, or maybe this is another word for it, like resilient, being able to put your kind of ego to the side and ultimately doing what's best for your team in that situation. That's the dominant move in my opinion. So kind of
Yeah.
moving forward, we mentioned like every team should have a vision or
Yeah,
value.
I think it's a dominant move, but I think it's also a little bit of hopefully that conscientiousness too
Yeah.
plays a role in some of those kind of
Yeah,
decisions.
that's why it's got to be a balance. So moving forward, each organization has their values going in the draft, but then you also have, second most importantly is, all right, what are our positions of need? Like, what do we
Yeah.
need? Do we need pass rushers? Do we need shore up the defensive line? Do we need to have a better secondary? Do we need a
Very
shutdown
important
corner? Do
questions.
we need a
Yes.
quarterback? And a lot of teams need a quarterback. So you got to know this. And then after, like, the last thing would be, all right, you have your positions of need. You're looking at the guys that play these positions. Now you got to look and, okay, do they match the values of your team? Would they be a good fit for your scheme? Is this a quarterback? Like, do we have let's take the Arizona Cardinals, for instance. 2 years ago, they draft Josh Rosen in the first round to play quarterback, and then they bring in a new coach who changes up the entire offense. They're doing a spread offense, they have Josh Rosen, who doesn't necessarily fit that spread offense. He's more of a pro style guy. So what do? They go like, hey, screw it, let's draft another quarterback. So they get Kyler Murray in the first round, and which not a lot of teams draft quarterbacks back to back in the first round, and they did that, and it looks like it may pay off. So you really want to make sure this guy fits for your scheme on the field, but also your culture. the team
Mhm.
culture? Is this someone that's going to buy
Yeah.
in?
Well, I mean, but this, these are really difficult decisions.
Now, we're not the experts on telling you if an individual is going to be a fit for your scheme. Obviously, the coaches should be able to handle that. Your GMs and your coaches, these are NFL guys, tried and true. They know who fits what. But I think what Armin and I can ideally provide some sort of insight into what a psychiatrist can do, what a sports psychiatrist can do, is provide insight on who may be a fit for the culture, who may be a fit for the locker room, and or just what to look out for in these individuals.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think let's start over. Yeah. I mean, I think, we can all agree that culture and fit, from a team dynamic standpoint, are absolutely essential. Right. And, certainly there's an approach that I think that can be taken, sort of like a rubric that can be very helpful in making sense of whether or not the pieces fit, with the players, the coaching staff, and the different components of the system you're trying to develop. So,
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it's not to say that you could definitely get individuals from all these different backgrounds, and the NFL is becoming more and more of a diverse game. Obviously, the NBA is head and shoulders above the NFL when it comes to having players from multiple different backgrounds. They have international players from everywhere. But the NFL as well has people from all over the United States, and you definitely have your share of foreign players in the NFL as well, but individuals that come from different backgrounds, individuals that have different personalities. And you could definitely get individuals who are on opposite spectrums of different personalities, maybe even clashing personalities together on one team. Granted, there's 53 guys on an NFL roster, so you're not going to be able to draft 53 guys that you think are all going to be best friends and get along
well,
at all
with
times.
with the football team, you have teams within the team.
Yeah.
You have special teams. You have obviously defense, offense. You have offensive line, defensive line. You have the
Mm-hmm.
defensive backs,
And you have coaches
offensive backs
for each
quarterbacks,
position.
coaches. Yeah, I mean, so it's there are definitely teams and then team dynamics within the team. So it gets really interesting with the NFL. But going back to this rubric, we've talked about this before, but I think this is a great podcast episode to highlight some of these attributes, that we think should be emphasized, right, when you're looking into that franchise changing player, right,
Yeah.
making that huge selection, right, that number one pick, first round.
Oh, we're talking
right,
at top of the round. Yeah. Yeah, if you in the first round, you're definitely going for someone who's going to change the culture, or someone that is ideally carries all these great attributes that we'll discuss. Before I get into that, though, I did want to mention, like, the draft is important too, because, and you see this with even paying players, that are you going to use a first round draft pick on a running back in this day and age, this day and age in the NFL?
Well, I think it depends on a lot of things, right? It depends obviously on the degree of need at that position, because running back is always going to be a position of need. I think that no matter what, even if you have great skilled players as at the receiver position, the quarterback position, you got to be able to run the ball, at some point.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have that position spoken for, so and that's something that you could at least want to consider.
Yeah.
Now,
but that's
I think the other exactly the other layer of thinking there would be, not only what are my needs, but also what's the level of talent on the market, right? Because there are some years where you have some can't miss guys, right? Like the year that Saquon Barkley came out.
Yeah. That's exactly.
You can't pass up on that guy.
Yeah. So for someone like that, you're talking about like a once in generational talent. So he's the surefire can't miss guy. Yeah, but absolutely. When you're talking about like running back, you're talking about, it's not necessarily a specialized position. It's something that you can, and you've seen this, several starters. You can get late 5th, 6th round. You can get undrafted free agents that come in and become Pro Bowlers at the running back position.
For
So
sure.
it's not necessarily a position you want to spend money on unless you're getting someone who can be like a Saquon Barkley, a Christian McCaffrey, an Alvin Kamara, Le'Veon Bell, someone who is a
You
jack
see
of all
those
trades.
guys out there. There you go. So another component of a running back is that depending on the style of offense, they're going to be a guy that aren't just carrying the ball in short yardage situations, but guys that you can, spread the field with. They can become receivers. They can, catch out of the backfield, and they can make plays or playmakers. Right?
Yeah.
So those utility style players, they, in certain offenses, you can their value becomes exponential.
Exactly. But they're more replaceable. And you think this is like easy. And granted, we're saying this in retrospect, but look, the Patriots just 3 years ago, they draft Sony Michel out of Georgia.
Right.
And
right.
I mean, he's been okay, but that's someone you spend a first round draft pick on.
Yeah. I think depends on how you look at it. I mean, I think that Sony Michel actually played a large role in that last Super Bowl win that they had.
I mean,
he didn't win MVP, but he could have. I think he was definitely in contention.
I mean, he had a solid rookie season, not so much his second year, but do you
Super Bowl
not
MVP?
Do you not think that performance could have been replaceable?
Well, but the question is not, as a running back, certainly, there are plenty of running backs in the league that are better than Sony Michel. The question you have to ask yourself is, was that pick replaceable? So in other words, was there another guy on the market at that position at that time that could have come in, made a bigger difference, a bigger impact on, the playoffs and ultimately the Super Bowl,
or
Sony Michel?
Yeah, and then in the last draft they drafted N'Keal Harry, and that ultimately leads up to Tom Brady leaving because he doesn't have enough weapons to go to Tampa Bay.
Tampa Bay, I love it. That's great.
Yeah, I mean they won a Super Bowl with Sony Michel, but these things can have repercussions down the line if you mess up the draft, especially if you mess up those first couple picks that you have. And as an aside, we should talk about how Gronk just decided to join Tom Brady and the Patriots traded him down to Tampa Bay.
Oh, yeah, we have to talk about that. I mean, that's huge. That is like, I guess, a moment of mindfulness in sports, right? I mean, look, here's a game-changing tight end, really still relatively young.
He's only 30.
Yeah, and I mean, I saw him play in 2 seasons ago. I mean, he looked good.
And the playoffs against the Chiefs, 1-on-1 against Eric Berry, had a huge play, and then in the Super Bowl he set up the winning touchdown. So
he did.
This is a guy who's been banged up, but if I had to choose one tight end, it'd be Gronk. Yeah,
he's definitely a guy that you would consider to be among the greatest tight ends of all time. And you look at his statistically. He's not going to be at the top of the list in any category, just because of his lack of longevity. And, he's
other than playoff touchdowns.
He's banged up. Well, of course, his playoff performance, no doubt. But I tell you what, even though most of these careers are based on statistics and longevity awards, one of the things about Gronk, man, is his big playmaking ability. There's playmaking ability, and then there's big playmaking ability. And one thing about Gronk is he's a big playmaker. He's a guy that's going to make the biggest plays in the biggest moments, and that's why he's invaluable.
Yep, absolutely. So that's exciting. That's to see those two. We get the privilege to watch two of the best to ever do it link up again. Granted, I'm not the hugest Tom Brady fan because I'm a Steelers fan, and he beat down the Steelers and the Colts several times. So
there were many teams, many other victims,
exactly,
besides just those two.
So that'll be interesting to watch down in Tampa Bay. But
it is. We haven't really talked about that. I mean, hopefully at some point we do. But
I think
it's an epic. It's the sort of next chapter of an epic duel, kind of a game within a game between between Bill Belichick and Tom Brady.
Yep.
Two legendary sports figures.
Mm-hmm. looking to
going toe to toe.
establish themselves separately from each other. Who's going to end up on top? We'll see. Time will tell.
Yeah.
So we're definitely doing a podcast on that. So speaking of the drafts, that the Patriots got back a 4th-round draft pick for this year's draft. So a lot of movers and shakers that surround draft day, because these GMs are trying to figure it out, and they're doing it now from the comforts of their own home through Zoom.
Yeah.
They're doing physicals, and we'll get into like individual players, but Tua Tagovailoa for the Alabama quarterback. They had the fractured hip, dislocated hip, fractured posterior wall of the hip. And NFL teams aren't seeing him in person to do a physical. They have to do it over Zoom.
Isn't that crazy? That's insane. How does that even work?
Yeah. I imagine somehow, some way they're doing those physicals. But this day and age, there's so much more information with regards to these players out there for these GMs and these coaches to evaluate. You have social media pages. You have people like analyzing what did you favorite or what did you like on Twitter. We had that issue I think we talked about before. Nick Bosa, the defensive end out of Ohio State, was liking and tweeting pro-Trump things, and then he was getting flack because he was going to get drafted 2nd overall to the San Francisco 49ers, which is San Francisco's an overall liberal place, so he had to shut down his Twitter. And that was all the noise leading up to it. But what happened? Nick Bosa ended up being the NFL defensive rookie of the year. They went to the Super Bowl. He had an amazing year, and that's all kind of nonsense at this point. So there's so much of this information out there that like GMs, coaches, fans think they're getting a better insight into this player and how they're going to be on the football field, but in reality, it may have nothing to do with how they can perform and how they buy in. And
and I just want to touch on that because that's such an important part of this. It's funny how, like, people often think that they can, for example, look at a box score, right, and know what happened in a game, or be able to kind of get an idea based on just kind of like reading the stats and the analytics or whatever, that they understand the game. You got to look at the tape, man. You have to look at it. You have to look at the film. You have to see the game. You have to, hell, it's probably the best thing is to actually be there live, right? Seeing it, firsthand. That's the best perspective. It's always going to be the best perspective is when, the closer you can get to a person up close and personal, right? And there's really no other forum than, folks like you and I get to experience this type of connection than in the exam room, right? The medical exam room, or for us, the therapy room, when, it's just a one-on-one thing, and it's like, hey, let's just talk, let's just have a conversation. Let's get to know each other, off the field, off the record, let's just talk. That's the best way, I think, always to figure out if someone's a good fit. Let's just have a conversation. Look them in the eye, shake their hands, right?
Yeah.
Reach out and touch, or today's day and age, do an elbow bump or whatever. But you know what I mean? Like you have to connect.
But that's difficult because there's so many players, there's so many prospects, there's a limited amount of time. You can't really sit down with someone for more than 5-6 minutes. And it's not hard for a prospect to come off good or not show any red flags in those 5 or 6 minutes, especially if they're talking with someone who is a coach and isn't necessarily trained to be psychoanalyzing someone. So I think you just look at the track record, like you mentioned, the tape. Is this someone who, I guess, has faced some sort of adversity and has succeeded throughout their career in team sports? Are you able to talk to not only their former coaches, but their former teammates?
Yeah.
Get a sense of, were they a good teammate? Were they a leader? What did they win a lot of games? Maybe if they're at like a smaller program, maybe winning a lot of games isn't a big deal, but were they competitive? Were they trying until the end of the game? Were they trying their hardest, even in a blowout? Things like that.
I see where you're going with this team. Yeah. I see where you're going.
So
now I'm feeling you, man. Like, we're really going with this, especially once you include the the combine, the physical fitness profile, the health assessment. Now you have a biopsychosocial formulation.
Yeah.
Now you're putting all the pieces together,
Mm-hmm.
and that's really, I think, the essence of the rubric.
Yeah. So I think if you have a mental health expert on your staff, you certainly can have them, if you're zoning in on specific players, especially their first overall pick, or you're trying to pick a franchise quarterback, have them sit down with that individual. But if you don't, look at the tape, gather as much information from former teammates and coaches. And this brings me back to, like I mentioned before, if someone's trying their hardest, even in the not so best circumstances, like you talked before about how Michael Jordan got cut sophomore year from the varsity team. He had to play on JV. I'm reading a book right now called Playing for Keeps, written by David Halberstam. And he talks about how the coaches would go to the JV games and MJ was just putting it on them. You would think that it's a tie game with 20 seconds left. That's how hard he's going, even though maybe they're getting blown out by 20 or they're up by 20. He's going full tilt regardless. So ideally you want an individual that's going to go full tilt, and put in like the highest level of effort possible when they're playing, because that's what you're looking for. Someone who's competitive, passionate, and driven to the highest degree. And the best predictor, just like in psychiatry, the best predictor of something that's going to happen in the future is past performance. So that's why you're seeing a shift in the NFL right now, where they're drafting more so on past performance. They're drafting these players that have shown that they're competitively great. We talked about it, and actually talked about in Competitive Greatness podcast.
Yeah, it makes sense too. I mean,
they're not,
because if you think about it, like, the more often you've demonstrated a particular skill, a particular talent, the more of it that we see on display, the more likely you are to, the more likely it is that really is who you are, right? Definitely. That it's not just a fluke, it's a fly by night. It's not just a situational thing. That this is really what you're likely to do in any situation, or most situations, given the opportunity.
That's got to be the most reliable predictor. And you see that the team organizations are coming to their senses when they're drafting individuals like Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield. They're not the biggest, tallest, strongest guys at the quarterback position, which is known to being 6'5" or bigger. No, the NFL is changing its tune, probably because Drew Brees and Russell Wilson have had huge success, but there is no prototypical quarterback anymore. The prototypical quarterback is the quarterback that they've seen already demonstrate competitive greatness. It's not necessarily going to be the Josh Rosen from UCLA who's 6'6" and hits all the measurables.
Yeah, and this is kind of why, like, it really, and this is probably something, fundamentally different between basketball and football at the professional level. Is like, it really probably pays to be a more seasoned college player right before going into the league. Like, in spite of the injury risk, that you take by staying an additional season, I'd much rather, especially if I'm an exec and I'm looking into, these college athletes, I'd much rather go with the senior than the sophomore, right? Because I have 4 years, potentially 5 years of film, with this guy doing what he does, right? And it just feels like it's more of a known quantity at that point.
Yeah. And so let's look at the last couple first-round draft picks. Baker Mayfield, walk-on at Texas Tech, ended up transferring because Patrick Mahomes took the starting job at Texas Tech, transfers to Oklahoma, earns a scholarship. The rest is history, becomes the Heisman Trophy winner. So he had to overcome adversity. Only 6'1", not this highly touted guy out of high school. And then last year, Kyler Murray, first overall draft pick. He didn't start at Texas A&M, transferred to Oklahoma. Wow. Won the Heisman.
Also, and didn't Russell Wilson? He has a similar story.
Yeah, started out at NC State, and then ended up graduate transfer to Wisconsin.
That's right.
So these are all guys that faced some adversity and kind of went through the mud a little bit to prove themselves as viable options.
Exactly, man. And so now we're really touching on something important here, because earlier we talked about how this quarterback position is one of these positions, of great responsibility, probably the most important individual position in all of team sports, right? And to handle that kind of pressure, right? To be that resilient, to be able to take on such a role for an organization, potentially like a $1 billion franchise, huge fan base. You're gonna have to be a guy that's battle tested, that has character, like strong character
Mm-hmm.
strengths.
Someone who's developed resilience
There you go.
and someone who's developed confidence. So, and you mentioned
Yeah,
$1 billion franchise. Cowboys are worth $4.4 billion. So you're right. These are the face of the franchise. This is your all-star employee right here. You oftentimes will be the reason why the franchise maybe gains in popularity and generates more and more money. Just look at the Chicago Bulls when Michael Jordan was there.
absolutely.
Look at the
Yeah,
Colts and Peyton Manning. He damn
yeah,
near the reason they had built that new stadium. So
yeah,
let's break down these attributes. These
yeah, man.
we've mentioned them before.
So
These 5
we
attributes.
did right. So resilient, confident, mindful, communicator, and passionate.
Yeah.
You know,
So we can't harp on these enough. We've talked about resilient and ad nauseum, but that's someone who owns their mistakes. You learn from your mistakes and you bounce back. And we just mentioned 2 number 1 draft picks that did that, and I think they're on their way to success. Russell Wilson obviously did it as well. People that are confident, someone that carries like a relentlessly positive attitude. You set a high standard of excellence. A lot of
yeah,
times, this involves being someone who's cold-blooded, someone that has the ability to regulate their emotions because they've been in that moment before. They have confidence that they can get the job done.
yeah. I mean, confidence is to me, we've talked about this before. It's a lot like gratitude. It's one of these rare sort of attributes that it's infectious, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you're confident and you're in a group or with the team, that's going to have an effect on the other players around you, right? They're going to feed off of that. It's going to elevate their
Yeah,
game.
absolutely. That confidence is your anchor. When you have confidence, you're going to be able to focus on the task at hand. You're not going to get persuaded or thrown off your game by boos from the crowd or heckling, or maybe you're sick that day. You're not going to get thrown off because you're confident in your skill set and you're going to just be able to focus on what you can control. That's what being confident is, and that's why it leads to better performance. And then
Absolutely.
that transitions perfectly into be able to being mindful of what the moment requires.
What it requires, right? Right. When and it's that Wooden quote. We always go back to that Wooden quote. Being at your best when your best is required. And knowing when that is. It's a big part of leadership.
Yeah. And it's been like we mentioned before with the Ryan Tannehill example, know your limitations, know the
Yeah.
situation, know that, all right, it's not on me to make the throw necessarily. It's on Derrick Henry to make the run. So, and it's just being there and being mindful in the moment. And then you mentioned being a communicator, being an efficient and good communicator. And that doesn't necessarily have to be the vocal rah-rah guy like a Drew Brees. It can be someone who leads by example, that communicates via being the first one at practice and the last one to leave.
That's right. And ultimately, I think here's a big one: embodying the team's values and principles. Right. We talked about this in the beginning of this podcast, how important it is to establish and understand the team's identity, and their culture, and what one of these players can do in terms of really shaping, that identity. And so you want your leaders, you want these types of guys to be walking, living examples of what this team's about,
Mm-hmm.
right? We
Yep.
want like promoters. We want them to be like these, like ad campaigns for everyone else to know in the post game interviews, right? when you're with the fans, when you're, even in the community, right? Just how you go about your business. We want you to be projecting our values. I mean, our culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're drafting, specifically in that first round, any position, you want that individual to become a leader of that position group. The quarterback obviously is going to be a leader of the offense, but also you want to, when you're drafting a first round offensive tackle or offensive lineman, you want him to be the leader of that offensive line group. You want him to set the tone. When you're drafting a wide receiver in the first round, you want that wide receiver to set the tone for the wide receivers. Same thing with middle linebacker with the entire defense, the defensive line. Think about Tyrann Mathieu. He wasn't drafted by the Chiefs. They brought him in, but he became the captain of that secondary. And look how that turned out. They ended up winning the Super Bowl. So you want these individuals that can come in, and if you're drafting in the first round, you want them to be leaders, and you want them to be resilient, confident. You want them to be good communicators, be mindful, and you want them to be driven and passionate about the game and about winning.
All about winning. All about the W. Mm-hmm. Because I mean, gosh, that's what separates professional sports from everything else. Amateur sports, youth sports, et cetera. Is like, at that level, there's so much at stake. It's not just about pride. It's not just about bragging rights or whatever.
Yeah, it can be.
It's not just about like fantasy football championships and things like that. $500 here and there. I mean, we're talking about like billions and billions of dollars of revenue, and not just that, but I mean, think about the fans, the fan bases. The businesses. That support the teams, and just the whole infrastructure. The employees, everything that goes into a professional organization, sports organization. It's a huge thing, right? And all of these things are on the line when you're talking about winning, at the professional level. Right?
Yeah.
All these things matter.
And kind of to that, there's a lot more distractors when you're a professional athlete, because a lot of these guys, the reason they wanted to play professional sports is they want that paycheck. They want that payday. So once they get that payday, do they care as much about winning? Once they get that fame, maybe they wanted that fame. Do they care as much about winning? Do they care more about their brand? A lot of these guys, especially in the NBA now, it's more so about their brand. Maybe they have other interests outside the sport. Maybe they want to be a rapper, like Damian Lillard, although he's an ultra competitor. But they have other things going on. So you want to try to find those guys that really do care about winning.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, ultimately you are going to have, I mean, you mentioned, there's so many guys on a team, on a football team, not even to mention like the practice squad and, the various members of the coaching staff. So, obviously, not everyone can be as dedicated, as the most dedicated people. But, you still want, I think, a collective group of people that all of which, know their role, right? Know how they fit in. And I think ultimately buy in.
Yeah. Not everyone's going to be a leader. You're going to have some followers out there. You need some followers. Not everyone can be a leader. But you want to try to avoid getting into or creating individuals like an Antonio Brown, who at one point it wasn't necessarily about winning. It became more about his own personal wishes. So you want to try to limit the amount of those individuals. Certainly, if you have a good, strong foundation, you could take on a few of those individuals onto your team and hope that they buy in, because you have this great foundation, this that you can gain their respect. But ultimately, you need to create this culture, and the shelf life of a head coach and a GM in the NFL, it's not very long. So oftentimes you have to do it through the draft, and you got to do it quickly.
Speaking of which, I mean, you think about like a typical sort of NFL, NBA, even Major League Baseball, like dynasty, you're talking about really probably a 5 to 10 year stretch, at the most, 15 to 20 year stretch, if you have a guy like a Brady, who just has that kind of longevity and happens to stay with the same team, throughout his career. But that's what you have to work with. And you basically, have what you have before you is, you have the opportunity to draft this type of player, that culture changing, franchise changing player. And then if you know what you have, if you identify correctly that this is what you have, the Zion Williamson guy, right, the Tuas, right, the Joe Burrows of the worlds, then you want to make sure that you're singularly focused on building a team around that guy, right? And understanding him as a player, as a person, allowing them to be them, but at the same time, being again an embodiment of the culture and the values of that team.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But there's a lot that goes into this process.
That makes me think, like, if we're talking scheme wise, I immediately think about like the Orlando Magic they built a pretty damn good team around Dwight Howard, someone who is offensively limited in the low post, but dominant with like rebounds and dunks. But they just put a bunch of long rangy shooters around him, 3-point shooters, and they made it to the finals one year. Granted, they didn't win. It makes me think of the Dallas Mavericks in 2011. They built a team around Dirk Nowitzki, and they ended up winning a championship. And he's not he's not your stereotypical alpha or number one on the team, but they won a title with him because they built a team around him. And do you want to go through like the last 20 or so number one overall draft picks from
it'd be interesting to just kind of like talk about them and maybe
see
even
which
like,
ones worked out,
see how they worked out, see if these GMs and their strategies made sense, right?
We'll call this the boom or bust portion of the podcast. So you want to start with the NBA or the NFL?
Let's go NFL.
Okay, so I'm going to start with Peyton Manning in 1998. So we'll start there. So obviously Peyton Manning, boom. He hits the boom category, 2 Super Bowls, 5 MVPs. We can move on quickly from him. So Tim Couch, quarterback from Kentucky.
Actually, but let's do this. Let's make sure we accurately define what each category means, right? So we have, how many categories do we have?
4 categories.
4 categories. Okay. So you mentioned boom, right? Boom. So that's a guy that absolutely can't miss. But what defines that, right? Are we talking about, so in the NFL, we're talking about a Pro Bowl, at least one Pro Bowl? But is it even more than that?
No,
Super Bowl?
Everyone and their mother makes the Pro Bowl in the NFL. I mean, it's got to be someone who's either won a championship or won MVP.
So it's got to be at least MVP or championship, not both, right? Okay.
One or the other.
Either or. And then, so that's basically like greatness. Mm-hmm. Okay. And
it paid off.
Paid off, definitely. That pick paid off. Is a great pick. Next tier below that would be
like good. Solid. It's solid.
Solid.
Yeah.
Solid pick. All right. And for solid, we're talking about, let's see, they maybe made the playoffs, every year.
Yeah. Perennial starter.
Perennial starter.
You're winning more often than not.
Okay. Maybe led the league, or was one of the top players in the league at their respective positions. Statistically, exactly. Okay. And then what would be the next tier below that?
I think the next tier would be bust. And then you have, which that's pretty obvious, someone that didn't live up to expectations. And then the jury is still out, because a lot of these guys, the jury.
Younger guys, yeah. So and that's the thing too, right? So we have to understand the life cycle of the athlete. And these GMs, which I'm sure they understand this very well, and they have to use this in their analysis. You're probably going to be entering your prime in about years 4 or 5, right? By most people's standards, I'd say, and that prime is going to be a 5 to 10 year window, to me, depending on genetics, right?
Yeah.
And you got guys like LeBron James who have an extended window, maybe a 10-year kind of stretch, or even
Tom
more
Brady
in that prime. Obviously, the Brady's of the world, but 5 to 10 years, you have more limited, prime eras, like with the Dwayne Wades.
Yeah,
right. He probably only really had 3-4 years of solid prime play, at the highest level.
Yeah. So I do want to clarify before we go into this. the rating isn't just based off the player. Obviously, the player had to get put in a scenario in order to be successful. So the
Yeah.
franchises, the head coaches, the teams are as much as responsible for the boom bust good as much as the player. So we don't want to put all the blame or give all the success to necessarily to the individual.
Okay, so let's keep going. So you got obviously Peyton Manning
Yeah.
is a boom. All right.
So we'll go quickly. The next one's Tim Couch, 1999, quarterback out
Bust.
of Kentucky.
He's a
Bust.
notable bust,
Yeah.
man. He's a well-known
Yeah.
bust.
So the next one, 2000, Courtney Brown, defensive end out of Penn State, played only for a few seasons. Bust.
Bust.
He only played 7 seasons. So
Now
Michael,
this is like literally the number one
Mhm.
pick
Yep.
in the NFL draft.
So
Wow.
Tim
Okay.
Couch, it's worth saying, 1999, Tim Couch drafted by the Cleveland Browns. 2000, Courtney Brown drafted by the Cleveland Browns. So it's not a good sign when
Two
you
in a
have
row.
back to back
Wow.
busts at the number one.
Yeah.
So
That's tough.
2001. So this one might be difficult. Michael Vick. Because I really want to
Oh,
put
boom.
him.
No, man. No. Listen.
Because this,
listen.
I agree.
Yeah, no, because Michael Vick,
He's
first
transcendent.
off,
Transcendent.
he was exactly. So now we have to, I think, redefine what a boom means.
We don't have to redefine
A
it.
little
There's
bit.
exceptions. There's always exceptions.
Okay, so yeah, Michael Vick.
Because he revolutionized the game. He was the popularity he had, the
I
things
think
that we
I
saw
think
him
yeah,
do in the football field.
yeah. So what we do have to throw in there is that if they had a certain type of commercial appeal, right? Like he had a legendary commercial appeal that
His
can only
impact.
really be spoken for, right, by his celebrity, his impact, just his off the field presence
Well,
as
yeah.
a marketing icon. No, let's not go there.
Yeah. His impact on the
talk-
game. Like if you were playing Madden, maybe Madden 2002, you want to be Atlanta Falcons and you want to be Michael Vick because you're running all over the place.
Oh man, yeah. No, he was great, and I mean, he elevated a franchise that, really, I think, without, you take him out of the equation, and
Yeah.
the team probably wasn't in the playoffs.
He had a little resurgence with the Eagles as well. He was always solid, but I think, yeah, you're right. I'll give it the boom category just because the impact he made on just all of football, all of sports, all of pop culture.
One name, I have this thing, right, where anytime you achieve a level of greatness in life for whatever reason, but obviously for good, in which one word, just one, either your first name or your last name, like essentially is known worldwide, or around even the country, because it has such a ring to it, and you're so notable. And Vic, I mean, you say Michael Vick, you say Vic, the word Vic, right? And everyone knows who you're talking about.
Yeah.
That to me has a certain level of significance that, you just really, you can't replace.
Yeah, the weight of that is equal to winning. So 2002, we had David Carr. Tough situation for him, but bust for sure.
Yeah, his brother, different story, but yeah, unfortunately he was a bust.
Yeah, so 2003, Carson Palmer. So this is, I think, he's suitable for the good
He's
category.
A good player. He's solid.
Solid guy.
Yeah, he's solid player.
Yeah, bad franchise, but did pretty damn well. 2004, Eli Manning. So I'm gonna go boom.
Boom.
2 Super Bowls.
Got to. I mean,
yeah,
2 Super Bowls, MVPs. The household name.
2005, Alex Smith.
Good, solid.
Yeah,
solid.
Yeah,
definitely not a bust.
Yeah, definitely. I would say. And then 2000.
I mean,
a lot of quarterbacks.
He's had a career. He's had a good. What year is this that he was drafted?
So this was 2005. So 14 years in the league. He had
awesome.
a gruesome knee injury. I don't know if a couple years ago. Hopefully, he'll come back from that, but. He'd still be starting, I think, if he didn't hurt his knee.
Alex Smith could be in the running for, one of the best sort of like, that game manager prototype, there's certainly this historical legacy of quarterbacks in the NFL that they're not alphas. They're never the best player on their team, but they actually can link up with a great defense,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or
I was like
great skill players
Terry Bradshaw,
and win championships, right? At the highest
Troy,
levels.
Troy Aikman, Terry Bradshaw. Those are guys that not the
Absolutely.
historically the best QBs, but were damn near
Yeah, and they
good.
had the Emmett Smiths and the Michael Irving, Michael Irvin. You know, they had the Franco Harris and the Lynn Swans, but
Yeah,
hey, they kept it together. They were that
Stallers.
steady leader,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
And they got it done.
So 2006, Mario Williams, defensive end. He played 11 years in the league. Probably good.
Solid. I
Solid.
remember Mario Williams.
Yeah,
He's
four
solid.
Pro Bowls. The next one, 2007, Jamarcus Russell, drafted by the Oakland Raiders.
Bust.
Only
Absolute bust.
only
All
lasted
time bust.
3 years. Only lasted 3 years in the league.
All time bust.
Yeah.
And very notable for just like epic fails to include like not being able to like, you know, meet past the physicals and you know stuff like that.
This
and,
is
you
a
know,
guy who could throw it 80 yards from his knees.
Right.
So don't get enamored with the physical tools. 2008, Jake Long, offensive tackle. He spent 10 years in the league, 4 Pro Bowls. So I think we put him at a good, solid category. 2009 was Matthew Stafford. Good. Definitely good and solid.
He's solid, and I think he has still potential to be. I think he would be an interesting sort of like jury's out kind of guy because he's been in the league a while, but I think he has this potential in the right situation to be a guy that could win a championship if he had the right pieces around him, like a Terry Bradshaw
so
kind of.
You're saying if he wasn't with the current organization he's with?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So yeah, I think I agree with that.
I like Stafford. Stafford.
2010 was Sam Bradford, so he's been a bust.
Definitely bust.
2011, Cam Newton. So you know what? He won the MVP.
He was an MVP, and he was also a guy. You say what you want about Cam, but he was a guy that, like Vic, definitely had a very transformative presence on the NFL, you know, off the field. You know,
yeah,
from a marketing
I think a lot of that started in college for sure because he had one of the most historic college runs of all time. I think he's a jury's still out guy. I think because you can make the argument that one season wasn't an exception,
right?
But he's definitely has that potential to be a boom guy. So 2012, Andrew Luck. I mean, solid. He obviously was.
Oh boy, that's a tough one, man.
He was on track to be maybe hit this boom category.
Yeah,
but career ended prematurely, and
you could almost make an argument that he could. I mean, he's solid, obviously, but given the amount of hype, what he was supposed to be and what he ended up being, which was therefore, I think the championship, AFC championship is his peak. He could be a bust. He could almost be a bust.
Replace Peyton Manning.
Not based on the overall body of work, puts him, you know, especially because he has some Pro Bowls in there, into the, you know, the solid category. But if you compare it to what he was supposed to have been, like the expectations, he fell short of expectations.
He only played 6 years.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So let's finish this up pretty. Eric Fisher, offensive lineman for the Chiefs. He's been solid. Only made 1 Pro Bowl, but solid. Yeah. Jadeveon Clowney, defensive end. Solid. Jameis Winston.
Solid. Probably solid. I mean, he's still in the league. He's a starting guy.
Is he
you
still?
You want to say bust?
I think he's.
Because of the Heisman.
Out. Right now, he's a bust, but the jury's still out. He still has the ability to reach an upper echelon.
Yeah. No, he does.
And I think.
Let's pause real quick. I'm gonna grab my my power cable just so we don't lose power. Okay.
All right, we're back.
All right.
So yeah, jury's still on Jameis Winston. We got Jared Goff. I think we could all agree that these next 3 guys, the jury's still out. Jared Goff, first year looking like a bust, second year looking like a possible boomer, and now he's kind of somewhere in between. And then we got Myles Garrett, despite that incident, I think the jury's still out on him. And then you have Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray.
Yeah, man. They all have promise. But that's the thing, it's so interesting. There's so much that's unknowable about how a guy's going to mature. I mean, you see this stuff play out in college at that level of competition, and it's like time and time again we've seen how when guys get to that next level, it doesn't look the same.
Yep.
And it's hard to understand exactly what's going through their minds, different. And you have to start thinking when you see these dramatic shifts in how people are performing from the college level to the professional level. You have to wonder to what extent that maybe the culture, the values, the principles of the organization, maybe, was it the right fit?
Yeah.
Those questions have to come into play.
Absolutely. And teams that are drafting at first overall aren't usually the best circumstances or situations, but only 2 Super Bowl winning quarterbacks that were drafted number 1 overall since 1998. Brothers, both Mannings, and then you had one offensive tackle, Eric Fisher, who won a Super Bowl. But everyone else has come up empty so far. So that's the NFL. You want to do the NBA real quick?
Yeah, man, absolutely.
And the NBA, I think it's a little bit, usually it's more surefire for the number 1 picks. I would expect to have more booms than busts in the NBA.
Yeah, so with the NBA,
the busts are legendary.
Yeah, I would say that you looking at the list, the NBA's list, you probably see like a higher proportion of notable players as the number 1 overall pick. But I would say that with the NBA, because there's so few players, that like it's more important that you get it right with the number 1 pick than with the NFL. Because NFL you sort of have like you have 6, 7 rounds. You have really so many more rounds, so many more opportunities. But with the NBA, it's 2 rounds. On the NBA side, I would probably go back to 96. I mean, you can even go back to 92. You got Shaq, right? I mean, Shaquille O'Neal, there's no doubt he's a boon, right? I mean, is there any question about that?
Right, next.
Yeah. Chris Webber.
Definitely good. I would say, I mean, he made the Western Conference Finals. I probably should have beat Shaq, but for how much hype he had in college.
Yeah, Chris Webber is interesting. I mean, household name. He was great dominant player, part of the great Fab Five out of the University of Michigan. Came to the league. I mean, he did take the Sacramento Kings to an NBA Finals, where they lost to, of course, Shaquille O'Neal's, ironically, Lakers. I would probably go. I'd have to go solid on this one.
Yeah,
it's heartbreaking because I'd love to give him a boon. We love Chris Webber. He's an icon in the NBA, but yeah, I just don't think his career quite got to that level. Milwaukee Bucks, 1994. They're with the number 1 pick selected Glenn Robinson, big dog,
solid.
Joe Smith,
Purdue University. Joe Smith's solid. I don't know much about
95. Yeah, University of Maryland. Yeah, I think he's had a solid career. I definitely wouldn't say he's a bust.
Let's go to
96, Allen Iverson.
All right, that's obvious. Boom.
Okay, 97, Tim Duncan.
Another lock. Boom.
Okay, 98. This is actually a pretty famous one, pretty notorious pick by the Los Angeles Clippers, Michael Olowokandi.
Who?
Obviously, other than his exotic name, no one really knows much about him. So he's a bust. 99, you got Elton Brand.
Solid. He had a good career.
Solid player out of Duke University. 2000 is Kenyon Martin.
Definitely solid.
Very solid. Very solid. I almost feel like with a Kenyon, a guy like that, you almost want to have like 2 solid categories because, he was almost under that premium,
Yeah,
high level
he was so
solid.
good at University of Cincinnati before he got hurt.
He did. Yeah, he was good. 2001, Kwame Brown,
That is your
notorious
yeah,
bust.
that's your modern day bust. Well, there's a
Oh
couple other
man,
on this list.
2002, Yao Ming.
Boom.
You
Global.
think so?
If we're
Yeah,
good, Michael
global
Vick, global impact.
Michael Vick level type. Yeah,
I mean,
he's a Mike Vick boom.
yeah, his injuries ultimately derailed his career, but just the impact he had in that brief moment he was playing, I think you
Yeah,
got to put him in the
and
boom.
bringing the NBA, bringing China and the NBA together, I agree with that. 2003, the one and only, perhaps the greatest number one pick of all
Yeah,
time,
yeah,
LeBron James.
I think we don't even need to say more.
2004, here's an interesting one. Here's a very interesting one. Dwight Howard.
So no titles, no MVPs,
He did
but
get to an NBA Finals.
he did, and that
Lost to Kobe.
he was the alpha of that team. I think
Defensive Player of the Year award
true,
multiple times.
and dunk contest champion, pretty big superstar during his time. So I would say
Superstar.
he definitely exceeded expectations. Although to a certain point he just kind of leveled off and went downhill.
Yeah,
He's playing great this year. Could have won a title this year. Could still win a
could
title
have,
this year.
should
So
have.
jury's
Yeah.
still out. Could still be a boom.
Okay, jury's still out. There we go. 2005, Andrew Bogut.
Solid.
Won a championship, right?
He did, but we can't put
But
him in the boom category.
he wasn't. Yeah, he wasn't part of the core nucleus of that team. Then 2006, Andrea Bargnani.
Yeah. So he, unfortunately, my Italian buddy, he's a bust.
Probably a bust. 2007, Greg Oden.
That's so much promise. Oh, that kind of makes me picked one spot ahead of Kevin Durant.
One of the most interesting busts of all time. And I would say this is one of the busts I actually really feel sorry for, because he was a guy whose, his career was derailed by injury. He couldn't stay healthy. It wasn't because he didn't work out. I actually think he had the passion. And I think he had the talent to do well at the NBA level. And he had the body, certainly, in terms of just the frame. Yeah. Big body, but couldn't stay healthy. Couldn't stay on the court.
My home state of Indiana, I saw him in the high school championship game, teammate with Mike Conley, who went later in that same draft. They were teammates at Ohio State and went to the national championship, lost to the Florida Gators, that had that great trio. But yeah, what could have been? But yeah, definitely a bust.
What could have been? 2008, Derrick Rose, another very fascinating.
Yeah. So it's
like, here's a guy, his MVP, youngest MVP.
Exceeded expectations early on.
Yeah.
So I think you have to put him as a boom category just for what he did in Chicago. But then, unfortunately, similar to Greg Oden, injuries really derailed his career. But kind of having a bounce back, kind of having a resurgence right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Derrick Rose, certainly an iconic player, if nothing else. 2009, Blake Griffin.
Ooh, I'll let you go first on this one.
Yeah, so I'm going to go Boone on this one.
Really?
And the reason why, because the thing about Blake is I would give him Boone almost the same way I would want to give Boone to like a Yao Ming or Michael Vick. He had this star power, him and Chris Paul.
Lob City, dunk champion.
Lob City, what they were able to do. And there was a good 4 or 5 year stretch where, Blake Griffin, I feel like he was vying for top 10 player in the league.
Yeah.
So that's a big deal, top 10 player in the NBA.
He gets a bump because of the cultural impact. He was a little transcendent. All right, I'll give you that.
He was.
What about
2010, John Wall.
He's another guy that teetered on like being transcendent. He had the John Wall dance from Kentucky. Had a great one and done season there. Injuries have gotten to him over the last couple seasons. I want to give him a boom, but I'm going to say solid.
Yeah, I'd have to say solid with him, especially since nowadays, Bradley Beal is pretty much taking over that team.
Mm-hmm.
And Wall, I guess his run as the best player on that team. I actually didn't realize that he was drafted in 2010. He actually was probably for what a good 8 years, the best player on that team.
Mhm.
So that's significant.
They
But
won some playoff series.
they did, yeah. But I agree,
That's
probably
not
more
it.
solid,
Mhm.
probably more solid work. 2011, Kyrie Irving.
Oof. Another controversial, polarizing player. Definitely a
I would
boom.
say, I would say boom, yeah, because
That
he has that championship and he has
that
what
shot.
most would say what the greatest, many would say the greatest shot in NBA Finals history.
No, I like Michael Jordan against the Jazz.
Michael Jordan against the Jazz is in there. Ray Allen, of course,
Yeah,
against the Spurs, that's in there. And even though it wasn't an NBA Finals,
Kawhi.
Kawhi's shot something
Yeah,
else,
that
man.
that the picture is just the most iconic thing. But yeah, taking down the 73 win Golden State with that shot over Steph Curry,
Oh,
that's a boom right there.
that really is. Anthony Davis is the 2012 number one pick.
So I would have been on the fence up until this year, but I think how it was trending, I think you have to go with boom.
Yeah, how it was trending, right? He doesn't have any of these. You almost have to lean towards jury still out
Hmm.
because as great as he is, top five player,
Doesn't have the
it's
hardware.
sort of like he really doesn't have any accolades to show for it. No MVPs, obviously no NBA, championships. In fact, he doesn't even have a Western Conference Finals to show for
His
his
one playoff
performance.
series win.
So yeah, so I think I would actually go with jury still out on Anthony
Yeah.
Davis, even though I think he's a great player. 2013, you got Anthony Bennett. It's
Out of
almost
Utah
like,
or UNLV.
yeah, at a UNLV, it's almost like a total. I mean, Anthony Bennett could, quiet as kept, be the worst number one pick in NBA draft history. I mean,
Yeah.
that could be up there with worse than Kwame Brown, because at least Kwame, like, he played for a couple
Yeah.
years, even got some playoff performances in there because he was playing with Kobe. This guy Bennett, man, I mean, you
Yeah,
know,
I'm not. I think he's playing professional ball somewhere else. I'm not too sure about his life leading up to that point, but that wasn't the best draft. I mean, I think you
yeah,
have three solid guys that came out of that draft. Obviously, Giannis was an unknown, and he's a boom guy that came out of that draft. Um,
yeah.
but and then you have
And how could you have possibly known about what that
yeah,
was going to happen,
Victor
or
Oladipo went
how that was going to happen?
number two, and then C.J. McCollum. So those three solid guys in that draft. But other than that, that draft was extremely weak. So I feel bad for Anthony Bennett a little bit there.
Well, 2014, the same team, Cleveland Cavaliers, drafted Andrew Wiggins.
So what's with the Cleveland Browns and the Cavs always having these number one picks? Because the Cavs also had Kyrie Irving, the number one pick in
Yeah,
2011.
yeah. So there was a stretch of 4 years between 2011 and you said 2014 where the Cavs had number one pick and they chose Kyrie Irving, Anthony Bennett, Andrew Wiggins, respectively. None of those guys are on the current
Yeah.
roster. That just goes to show you, that's just a dysfunctional organization.
Well, NBA is also different than NFL,
Yeah,
so we can't harp on that too much. Andrew Wiggins, I want to say, I mean, he's not going to be a boom guy. We know that. He's not going to be a number one guy that leads your team to a title.
NBA is different, but let's be honest. We have to go back to our original principles. Like, in order to build a winning franchise, you have to have stability in the organization. If you have three number one picks, remember we said about the number one pick. These are guys that you're anticipating are going to be franchise changing guys. So you had three guys in the last 10 years, none of which are still on the team. That's certainly a marker of dysfunction one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I agree with you, the player movement era has been played a big role in the last 10
Yeah,
years.
it's interesting if you look at this list. I guess John Wall, 2010, still with the Wizards, but then you have to bump all the way up to Karl Anthony Towns, who's next on the list in 2015, who's still with the same team.
Ben Simmons,
So
um,
these are jury still out guys. They're not boom guys though. I don't think Ben
yeah,
Simmons or Karl Anthony Towns are guys that are gonna lead your team as the number one alpha to a championship.
yeah, I agree. I think so. Basically, between 2015, 2019, you have as follows: Carl Anthony Towns, Ben Simmons, Markel Fultz, DeAndre Ayton, and Zion Williamson. Of that group, the only one that we can say for sure is that guy is Zion.
Zion's a boom already,
Yeah,
I think.
already for
You
sure.
get the cultural impact for that. And then I think Fultz, I think he's not going to be a boom guy, I don't think, but jury's still out whether he can be a solid contributor, which I think he had been this year for Orlando. So it's,
Yeah, I mean, but when you think about these guys, like these five, Towns, Simmons, Fultz, Ayton, Williamson, which of these guys would you put? If you were to do a disc analysis, a disc assessment on each guy, which guy would be most likely to have a strong predominance of dominant traits?
hmm, that's a
I
good
think
question.
I think it's got to be Zion.
Yeah.
I think even though Ben Simmons is that guy, I mean, or has that persona to be that guy as well. I definitely have seen when you think about the relationship with Joel Embiid, and how
Hmm.
that's played out.
And even
Um,
Jimmy Butler last year.
Andrew, but last year, yeah, I mean, I feel like I have actually seen um, maybe the play and the performance of a guy like Simmons diminish a bit, um, with the presence of another guy like that. I actually think that when you if that when that happens, that's a sign of a guy that maybe isn't really the dominant player that you're expecting them to be.
Oh,
Because what I would hope to see is more of a Kobe Shaq, sort of dynamic, or a Wade LeBron sort of dynamic, where it's like we both can appreciate each other's greatness and realize that we have to be great together and elevate each other's play in order for this team to be great. You want to figure out, because it's all about winning, and I think that you start to wonder about a guy's really their passion for winning when there's another great player next to them and they're not able to figure that out.
yeah.
You know?
It could point to a lack of self awareness. Maybe
Yeah,
he thinks he's the alpha over Joel Embiid, and therefore that creates a mismatch, and they don't
yeah,
work as well together. Someone at the end of the day, if you have two alphas, if you have a Shaq and Kobe, if you have a LeBron and Dwayne Wade in the heyday, if you have a Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce, at some point, someone has to take charge. Someone's going to take that last shot.
yeah.
Someone's going to take control of the locker room.
And
And
if you're Simmons in this situation, how do you not defer that role? Because you can't shoot the ball. You know that. You're not even willing to take the shot in the regular season when the
mhm,
pressure's not on. So I don't know. I mean, it really shouldn't be a battle. It
yeah,
should be more of like a Magic Johnson type of, like, hey, like, I'm a great playmaker. I know how to get you in position. Let me just kind of like focus on
yeah,
that and highlight that.
yeah. Let's not let Joel Embiid off the leash though. He also, or let's not let Joel Embiid off the hook though, because he's someone who
Yeah,
also has gotten a lot of heat from the older guys, Shaq and Chuck, for chucking up 3 pointers too often, and settling and not
that's so
using his
true.
physicality to dominate inside like he can do. So I think both of them are really still trying to figure it out. It's early in their careers, but they both have the physical traits I think to be dominant, to be leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, I think Joel Embiid's upside's a little bit more there. His game's a little bit more well-rounded. But maybe they just don't fit together, and maybe would be better on different teams with systems built around them as the alpha.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you're right. I
Yep.
think at the end of the day, when you have someone like that, you want a Ben Simmons who can't shoot to defer to the player who has a better opportunity to score.
It's got to be tough if you think about it for a guy like Embiid. You're a big guy, and obviously you can dominate the paint. You can dominate the paint. You have that size, but it's so hard when you have a point guard who can't help you spread the floor. So I think he probably kind of gets punished down there.
You see these guys sagging off Ben Simmons and just packing the
Yeah,
paint.
yeah, and and it must be tough. So it's almost like you feel like you have to set up, the shot for yourself to almost like kind of get a little bit of spacing for yourself to enable your post game to kind of take over because
Yeah.
you don't have a point guard that can set you up.
We'll talk about like, all right, we trusted the process. They had Joel Embiid, who was a top 3 pick, Ben Simmons, number 1 pick, Markel Fultz. So Markel Fultz always already was shipped,
Yep.
was already sent out. But all right, now what? Because it doesn't. Who knows if Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid fit together? I think Ben Simmons can be a player, maybe like a Dirk Nowitzki, even though he can't shoot. That you can build around that guy, but it has to be very specific towards his skill set. Build around him like more Magic built around Howard to create a contender. And
Absolutely, yeah.
that's why this season was going to be so interesting and come playoff time. But we'll see. All
Yeah,
right,
man.
so I know we've kind of probably gone longer than we anticipated, but I wanted to mention two. We're speaking of number 1 picks. Let's talk about this draft. Let's talk about the consensus number 1 overall pick that's about to happen. Joe Burrow.
Hmm.
So we mentioned before the last 2 first round picks, first overall picks, Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, overcame adversity through their college careers and showed that they're proven winners, proven competitors. Same thing with Russell Wilson in the past. Same thing with Drew Brees. Even when Drew Brees came into the league, he had that shoulder injury. He was at the Chargers. They drafted Philip Rivers, sent back in New Orleans, overcame that as a stud. Joe Burrow, he started his career. He wasn't even really, well, he was a 4-star recruit out of high school, highly touted from Ohio, went to Ohio State. Great program. So obviously got a lot of hype behind him, but he got beat out. He was a backup to JT Barrett for 2 years. And then Dwayne Haskins, who's now the quarterback for the Redskins, beat him out. So he had to transfer. He transferred to LSU, and he played his redshirt junior year there, where he had an okay season, and then came back for his senior year. Before his senior year, he was projected to either be a late 5th, 6th round pick, maybe even an undrafted free agent. And then all of a sudden, he has one of the most historic, legendary seasons in the history of college football. He threw for a record 60 TDs
Hmm.
and won the Heisman, won the national championship, and then skyrocketed. And now he's everyone's consensus number 1 pick.
Yeah.
And this guy is calm, cool, collected. If you've ever seen him talk or give a speech, at his Heisman Trophy presentation, he gave a speech about poverty and food insecurity in his hometown, and that led to over almost $500,000 worth of donations towards a food bank in his hometown. So this is someone who obviously has had this whole city, if not the entire South, if not the entire country, rallying behind him. I haven't talked to a single person that dislikes this guy and doesn't think he's going to succeed in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, uh, there's not a lot of holes, right? I mean, it's interesting. You look at a guy like Burrow, and it feels like a guy you want to try to find something about the situation that isn't right, but then you top to bottom, I mean, everything about him,
So
it looks good, right? I mean,
yeah,
statistically, obviously, some the best you've ever seen. He seems to have the leadership intangibles. He's
he
a
overcame.
winner.
Yeah, he overcame
Overcame
adversity.
adversity. He has the chip on his shoulder. He's an older guy. He's more mature. I think he's like 23, 24.
Hmm. He's older
um,
than Kyler Murray.
and he's obviously well decorated. And he's played in a conference that's very competitive.
Hmm.
So
I think he checks all the boxes when it comes to being resilient, being confident, being
he
someone
says
who's
the
mindful.
size.
Hmm.
The prototypical sort. He's 6'4", big body,
Yeah,
220.
yeah. So they've been trying to, like you said, try to poke holes in his game. They say he doesn't have the strongest arm, which he doesn't, and he doesn't have the biggest hands. But I think what we're trying to emphasize is you got to look at these intangibles plus the game tape. You can't get
You do.
thrown off by the
Um,
measurables.
I agree. The thing about a guy like Burrow, and I don't. I'm not an NFL scout, by any stretch, but one thing I think about, and you often wonder about when you think about the transition, from the collegiate level to the professional level, is like, all right, so obviously some of these players have the benefit of a great coach, great system, therefore great players around them. And you look at these numbers, the 60 passing touchdowns, the yards, the completion percentage, and you wonder like, is this a function of the guy, right? Or is it a function of the system and the players around him? And if it is some sort of balance of those forces, to what degree is this guy responsible for these numbers? In other words, could you fit him into any other kind of system with any other kind of coaching staff, other skilled players around him, not the guys that he had in this program? Does he perform the same? Does he perform, less capably, or does he perform better? Right? Sometimes these are you ask yourself these questions, and these are things that are kind of like really hard to know.
Can he turn the Cincinnati Bengals into a winning franchise?
Yeah, these are things that are hard to know because, clearly the franchise that he inherited, they weren't, a losing franchise. He didn't have to like lift a team out of the doldrums.
Yeah. I mean, he's throwing to 3 or 4 NFL guys, Randy Moss's kid, Justin Jefferson, who will be a first-round pick, Jamar Chase, who's going to be the number 1 receiver next year. So he had a lot of talent, great offensive coordinator, great system.
And it's a different situation. The interesting thing about a guy like Tua, who's obviously his closest competitor in this thing, is that, Tua, what's interesting about Tua for me is that I feel like he's a guy that's almost like been a celebrity for many years. Mm-hmm. Because of the mystique of the Alabama program, how the winning that was,
because he came in as a freshman
at Alabama for so many years, his being a freshman, quarterback, and just sort of like
coming in at halftime of the national championship.
The way that he came into, yeah, exactly. The way that he came onto the scene, obviously, he has the look, he has the charisma, he has the swagger. His coach loves him.
He's got that new age look too. He's got that Russell Wilson. He's got that Mayfield, that Kyler Murray look, kind of the short, compact, quick, accurate guy.
And there's something about Tua. He carries with him an aura, and it's been that way for years now. Obviously, he won a national championship already, and he's sort of had to carry the weight of that, and kind of being being the guy that has the
big man on campus,
target on his back, right, the bullseye, and he's still, I think, even though he had the injury issues, he's maintained this poise, right, and this steadiness, and this sort of self-confidence that I think you really have to be impressed by.
Yeah, I think we're looking at 2 potential boom candidates, both Tua and Joe Burrow, because I think if Tua doesn't get hurt, he's the number 1 pick because he has the better arm and has a more proven of a track record, being a pretty much one-time champion, 2-year starter at Alabama.
Yeah, honestly, man, if as great as Burrow was, it's kind of something we touched on earlier in the pod. Like, I worry with him, and this may be absurd, it may be ridiculous, right? But I just kind of worry, is he a one-trick pony kind of guy? Meaning, like, okay, he had this great season with this great moment in the sun, like, but is this really who you are, right? There's something about a guy like Tua, and don't get me wrong, the Tom Brady story, I love Tom Brady. I love the chip on the shoulder guy that, kind of like rags to riches, started from the bottom, now we're here. Like, he got beat out by inferior quarterbacks, potentially like Dwayne Haskins, but yet took his game to another level. It's a great story. It doesn't always work out, though. The more surefire story is the guy like the Tua, who's always been great. It just is clearly, that's just who he is. Whatever situation that he's been in, he found a way, to
Mhm.
rise to the occasion
Yeah.
time and time again.
Yeah, more
So
proven commodity, but I'm going all in on both these guys. I think Tua has the injury history, which scares you, but I think if he doesn't get hurt, I think both him and Joe Burrow are going to be starters in the league for years to come.
yes,
I think
sir.
it's just the
Exciting.
confidence. It's just the confidence and the resilience that both these guys have, and it's going to be an interesting and fun draft. I hope you guys are enjoying it. Huge, really deep wide receiver class too, so that's going to be fun. Um, so yeah, let's wrap this bad boy up. I think the last thing we wanted to talk about is what happens when your dream comes true. What happens when your dream comes true? What happens when you reach your goal? What happens when you reach your smarter goal that we talked about in episode 21 about goal setting? Do you celebrate? I think it's important to celebrate any accomplishment, any goal, because you that's that positive reinforcement that keeps you going. But do you become complacent or do you set new goals, new smarter
Mm,
goals?
yeah. Yeah. That. Oh, wow. Yeah. That's that next level. Kind of like mental fitness coaching right there. It's like, um, are we satisfied?
Hmm.
That's always the question.
Yeah.
I mean, we've gotten to a rhythm, right? We've kind of gotten to this point where we're more mindful. We're practicing gratitude. We developed a little bit of a system of getting better every day, and then we've achieved kind of short-term goals. But are we satisfied?
Yeah. And
Are we satisfied with that, or do we want to take it to an even higher level?
exactly. And that's what
Right?
we touched on earlier.
Yeah.
Like you want to try to find someone who's driven, who is passionate about winning, and that their goal wasn't just to get drafted and get that big paycheck to elevate their family, but they also want to make a name for themselves. They also want to win. They also want these other things. So I think that's part of the interview process when you talk to someone and you're drafting them. All right, what's next? What are your goals? What are your smarter goals?
What's
People,
your vision? What's your vision? It's not a lot of people can have goals, right? And I would imagine that any individual that is now like thinking about making that sport a profession, they've had goals and they've set goals and they've accomplished many different goals. But in my draft pick, particularly my first round draft pick or my number one draft pick, I want to know, do you have a vision, right? Do you see, what do you see for this franchise, well, for yourself, for your team, your teammates, for this franchise, this organization, or this city, 5, 10, 15, 20
okay,
years down the
okay,
road?
that's a lot.
Kobe
That's a lot of
Bryant,
pressure.
Kobe, if you saw some of those early interviews, right, you could tell he had a vision for what he wanted to be for this organization. He saw himself as a Laker 20 years down the road,
Hmm.
winning multiple championships. And I believe that because he had that vision early on, that was a big part of why he's able to accomplish so
Oh
much
yeah, definitely
down the
why
road.
he stayed and got that second round of championships. But I
Yeah.
think a concrete way to maybe get that vision out there is to do smarter goals. Make a goal that's
Yes.
specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, relevant, timely, exciting, and write it down. Record it. That's a smarter goal. Check out
Right.
episode 21 if you want to dive deep into that. But that's just a concrete way of doing it. So it's a huge day. It's a fun day. We finally get to watch some sort of live sporting event. I mean,
I
last
know it's exciting, man.
yeah, the MJ doc is amazing, by the way, and I can't wait to talk about Last Dance. But the NFL draft's going
Yeah.
to be a lot of fun, so we had to do a podcast about that.
Yeah.
And
Big day for a lot of cities, a lot of people out there. Who knows? It could be the first step along the road to you know the team's first Super Bowl.
yeah, so check out that disc assessment. All you GMs out there, check out the disc assessment. Check out, make sure these guys are resilient and mindful, and make sure they have smarter goals when they come to the league. And
That's right.
draft Joe Burrow or Tua Tagovailoa if you have an opportunity, because those guys are going to be studs.
Can't miss.
All right,
Let's
man.
let's continue the conversation.
And in the stigma.
There you go.
We reversed it. Is that
Do you
okay?
feel me?